I stood at the automated passport kiosk in Bangkok, exhausted and sweating in the humid air. I just wanted to get to Japan for the next leg of my backpacking trip. I placed my passport on the scanner glass and waited for the familiar beep. Instead of the green light I was expecting, the screen flashed a harsh, bright red. A low, buzzing alarm started to sound from the machine, drawing the attention of everyone in the departure hall. Before I could even lift my hand to ask for help, 3 armed guards materialized out of the crowd. "Sir, step away from the machine," one of them shouted, his hand resting on his holster. "It's just a glitch," I said, trying to laugh it off, though my heart started to hammer against my ribs. My chip probably got damaged. They didn't smile. They grabbed my arms and marched me into a small, windowless interrogation room. An official in a crisp uniform walked in 5 minutes later, holding a tablet. He looked at me with a mix of confusion and suspicion. "Mr. Vance," he said slowly, "why are you trying to travel with a cancelled document?" "Cancelled? That's impossible. I used it 2 weeks ago to enter Thailand." He turned the tablet around so I could see the screen. "According to the U.S. State Department database, this passport is invalid because the holder is deceased." I blinked, sure I had misheard him. "Excuse me, Ethan Vance is listed as deceased," he repeated, tapping the screen. "Date of death, 3 days ago. Cause of death, hiking accident in Chiang Mai province." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I am Ethan Vance. I'm right here. I've never been to Chiang Mai." He showed me a digital copy of a U.S. consular report of death. It looked official. It had my name, my birth date, and my passport number. Someone hadn't just made a mistake. Someone had legally killed me. For the next 4 hours, I was detained in that small room while the Thai authorities tried to figure out if I was a ghost or a fraud. They finally allowed me access to a computer to prove my identity, though they watched me like a hawk. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely type. I pulled up Google and typed my own name. The first result made me sick to my stomach. It was an obituary in my hometown newspaper, the Oak Creek Gazette. Ethan Vance, 32, beloved son and brother, tragically lost his life exploring the world he loved. I stared at the photo. It was a picture from my college graduation, one where I looked happy and full of life. I read the text, my vision blurring with rage. It described a private memorial service scheduled for next week. It talked about how much I loved my family, a family I hadn't spoken to in 6 months because they were toxic, manipulative narcissists. But the kicker was the last line. In lieu of flowers, the family asks that donations be made to the Julian Vance Entrepreneurial Trust, to support his brother's dream, as Ethan would have wanted. I sat back in the metal chair, the cold stealing into my bones. Julian, my younger brother, the golden child, who had never worked a day in his life. They weren't just mourning me, they were already fundraising off my corpse. They had turned my death into a GoFundMe for my brother's gambling habits. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I remembered I had a backup emergency credit card sewn into the lining of my backpack, a secret stash I kept for absolute disasters. The guards let me make one phone call. I didn't call my parents. I called Mr. Henderson, our old family insurance broker. He had always liked me, mostly because I was the only Vance who actually paid his premiums on time. "Mr. Henderson, it's Ethan," I said when he picked up. There was a long silence on the line. Then a gasp. "Ethan, is this a sick joke? Who is this?" "It's me, Mr. Henderson. I'm alive. I'm in Thailand. Listen to my voice. Ask me anything." "My God," he whispered. Your parents came into the office on Monday. They were hysterical. Your mother could barely stand." "Mr. Henderson, tell me exactly what they filed." He hesitated, invoking client confidentiality, but I pushed him. "They are committing fraud, Arthur. If you process that claim, you're an accessory." He cracked. "They presented a consular report of death. They claimed you fell off a ridge in northern Thailand. They filed for the expedited payout on your life insurance policy. The one you took out when you started your software company. The $4 million policy," I said, the number ringing in my ears. "Yes, they claimed financial hardship due to the costs of repatriating your remains. They wanted the money released immediately. $4 million. That was the price tag on my life. They didn't just want Julian's trust fund, they wanted the jackpot. The authorities finally released me on a temporary basis, pending verification from the embassy, but they confiscated my passport. I went to a cheap internet cafe and logged into a burner account. I needed to know why now. Why kill me off this week? I knew Julian's passwords. He used the same password for everything, GoldenBoy95. I logged into his Instagram and Facebook. What I found was terrifying. His private messages were full of threats. There were photos of him in Las Vegas from 2 weeks ago, looking sweaty and panicked at a high-stakes poker table. One message from a user named Vegas Shark read, "You have until the 30th, Julian. Or we take the house." And maybe a few fingers. I dug deeper into public records. There was a fresh lien on my parents' estate. They were broke. Robert, my father, had leveraged everything on a commercial real estate deal that went bust last month. They were drowning. They needed $4 million to clear the debts and save Julian from having his legs broken. I was the only asset they had left, and I was worth more dead than alive. One question still nagged at me: the body. You can't just get a death certificate without a body. How had they managed to fool the U.S. consulate? I contacted a local fixer I knew in Bangkok, a guy named Somchai who knew how the dark side of tourism worked. I met him in a crowded night market, shouting over the noise of frying noodles. It is not uncommon, Somchai told me after making a few calls. There are hikers found in the mountains every month. Unidentified. Jane does and John does. So they bought a corpse. I asked, feeling bile rise in my throat. They paid a corrupt local official in Chiang Mai, Somchai confirmed. A hiker was found 3 weeks ago. No ID. Your father wired $10,000 to an agency here. They slapped your name on the paperwork, claimed the body was decomposed, and ordered an immediate cremation. Cremation, I whispered. Yes. Fire destroys DNA. Fire destroys evidence. They aren't bringing you home, Ethan. They are shipping a box of random dust and claiming it is their son. It was a perfect crime. No body to autopsy. No DNA to test. Just an official paper and a grieving family. My first instinct was to call my mother and scream at her. I wanted to hear her voice crack when she realized I wasn't a ghost. But I stopped myself. If I tipped them off now, they would run. Or worse, they would send those loan sharks to finish the job for real. I needed a bigger weapon. I searched for the FBI field office in my home state of Connecticut. I navigated through the automated menu until I reached the extension for the Insurance Fraud Division. Agent Miller speaking, a gruff voice answered. Agent Miller, my name is Ethan Vance. You don't know me, but I believe. My parents have just filed a $4 million claim on my life insurance policy. Okay, Mr. Vance, and what is the nature of your complaint? Miller sounded bored, like he was filling out paperwork. The complaint, I said, staring at my reflection in the dark window of the cafe, is that I am currently talking to you on the phone. There was silence. Prove it, Miller said, his tone changing instantly. I took a selfie holding the day's Bangkok Post and a piece of paper with the current time and Miller's badge number, which I asked him to provide. I emailed it to him while staying on the line. Holy, Miller breathed. Stay right there. Do not move. Do not contact your family. The next 24 hours were a blur of federal efficiency. The FBI didn't want my parents to know I was alive. They wanted to catch them in the act of accepting the wire transfer. That meant I had to remain dead. Agent Miller arranged for an emergency travel document that didn't flag in the commercial system. I was flown back to the United States on a military transport plane, tucked away in the back with cargo. I landed at a private hangar in Hartford at 3 a.m. Agent Miller was waiting on the tarmac. He looked like a man who had seen it all, but even he looked unsettled by this. We have a situation, Ethan, Miller said as I climbed into his black SUV. If they find out you're alive before the funeral, they will destroy the evidence. They will claim it was a clerical error. They will escape justice. So what do we do? I asked. You are a ghost, Miller said, locking the doors. Until the money hits their account and the funeral begins, you do not exist. You are going to watch your own mourning from the shadows. The FBI set me up in a surveillance van parked 2 blocks away from my parents' estate. They had tapped the phones and placed tiny cameras inside the house. Warrants were easy to get when the victim was providing the evidence. I sat in the cramped van, staring at a bank of monitors. It was surreal. I was looking into the living room where I had grown up. My mother, Linda, was standing in front of the hallway mirror. She was wearing a black dress, but she wasn't crying. She was practicing. She contorted her face into a mask of grief, then relaxed it, checking her makeup. "Robert," she yelled toward the kitchen. "Make sure the caterer brings the expensive champagne. The vintage Dom Perignon. We're celebrating a new chapter." "Got it," my dad's voice floated back. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. There was no sadness. There was no loss. They were planning a party. They were celebrating their payday, and my death was just the ticket to admission. I zoomed the camera in with the joystick. The feed switched to the garden patio. Julian was lounging on a deck chair, smoking a cigar. He looked relaxed, the panic I had seen in his Vegas photos completely gone. Then I saw it. Glinting in the afternoon sun on his left wrist was a silver watch. My breath caught in my throat. It was my vintage Rolex Daytona, a gift I had bought myself when my company hit its first million. I kept it in a safety deposit box at the bank. "He's wearing my watch," I told the agent sitting next to me. "How did he get it?" the agent asked. "My safety deposit box. They must have forged my signature to access it days after my death. They didn't even wait for the body to come home. They looted my life immediately." Seeing that watch on the wrist of the brother who had bullied me my entire childhood, the brother whose debts I was being killed to pay, ignited a fury in me that burned hotter than anything I had ever felt. The next morning, a new alert popped up on the news feed. My parents had released a statement to the press. "We are heartbroken to share that Ethan had been battling inner demons for some time. We found journals in his apartment indicating he was taking reckless risks. We hope he has found the peace in death that he couldn't find in life." I stared at the screen, my mouth hanging open. "That's a lie," I said to the empty van. "I don't have journals. I've never been depressed." "They're building a narrative," Miller said, stepping into the van with coffee. "They want to make the accident seem like a manic episode or a suicide. If the insurance company thinks you were unstable, they ask fewer questions about a slip and fall. They weren't just killing my body, they were assassinating my character. They were rewriting my history to make me look like a broken, unstable man, just to ensure no one looked too closely at the details." Around noon, a small car pulled up to the estate gates. I recognized it immediately. It was Sarah, my ex-fiancée. We had broken up a year ago, but it was amicable. I still cared about her. She looked devastated. Her eyes were puffy, and she was holding a bouquet of white lilies. My mother met her at the door. I turned up the audio gain on the microphone. "Linda, I am so sorry," Sarah sobbed. "I can't believe he's gone. Did he say anything about me?" My mother sighed, putting a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Oh, honey, I didn't want to tell you this. But in his final letters, he said he never really loved you. He said the engagement was a mistake. He was moving on." Sarah crumbled. She dropped the flowers, covering her face with her hands. "I'm going to kill her," I growled, reaching for the door handle of the van. Miller grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. "No, you go in there now." She walks away with a slap on the wrist. "You wait, and she goes to federal prison for 20 years. Sit down." I sat down, watching my mother destroy the one person outside the family who actually loved me, just to keep her away from the investigation. "We have movement on the money," Miller announced 2 hours later. The insurance company, cooperating with the FBI, had released a good faith partial advance of $500,000 to cover the funeral and immediate debts. It was the bait, and my family had swallowed it whole. On the monitor, I watched Julian rush to the front door. He met a black SUV parked down the street. 2 heavy-set men in leather jackets stepped out. Julian handed them a duffel bag. Even on the grainy camera, I could see the stacks of cash. "There," Miller said. "Wire fraud is one thing. Money laundering to pay off illegal gambling debts across state lines. That's RICO territory. The debt is real, and the sharks are feeding." Julian looked relieved as the SUV drove away. He high-fived the air. He had just paid for his freedom with my blood money. The night before the funeral, my parents hosted what they called a wake, but it looked more like a gala. The house was full of people, neighbors, business associates, people I barely knew. My father, Robert, was holding court by the bar. He was already drunk, his face flushed. I zoomed the audio in on his conversation with a neighbor. "It's a tragedy, of course," Robert said, swirling his scotch. "But Ethan would have wanted us to thrive. And honestly, I've made some smart investments recently. Very smart. We're expecting a massive windfall this week. The Vance name is back on top." "To sacrifices," the neighbor toasted. "To sacrifices," Robert replied, clinking his glass. He wasn't grieving a son. He was celebrating a liquidated asset. To him, I was just a stock that had finally matured. I watched him laugh, a deep belly laugh, and I realized I had never really known him. I had loved a father who didn't exist. "We got the lab results on the urn," Miller said, handing me a report. The remains had arrived that morning via express courier. The FBI had intercepted the package at customs for 1 hour before letting it proceed to the house. "What is it?" I asked. "It's mostly wood stove ash," Miller said, pointing to the chemical breakdown. "Mixed with beach sand and a little bit of bone meal, probably chicken or pork. There is zero human DNA in there. They didn't even pay for a real cremation," I said, shaking my head. "They just scooped up some dirt." "This is the final nail," Miller said. "Desecration of a corpse is a state crime, but using it to facilitate wire fraud makes it a federal felony. We have everything we need." I looked at the urn on the mantel in the video feed. My parents were bowing their heads in front of a box of dirt, pretending it was their child. The morning of the funeral arrived with gray skies and rain. It was fitting. I stood in the back of the FBI van while a tactical agent handed me a suit. It was a black, tailored suit, identical to the one I was supposed to be buried in. I put it on, tying the tie with mechanical precision. I looked in the mirror. I looked pale, tired, and angry. I looked like an undertaker. "You ready to do this?" Miller asked, checking his earpiece. "You ready to die so you can live?" I adjusted my cuffs. I thought about the passport scanner. I thought about Sarah crying in the driveway. I thought about the box of sand. "I'm ready to bury them," I said. While we drove to the church, I used my laptop to access my father's email again. I wanted to see what he was going to say. I found a draft of the eulogy he had sent to the pastor that morning. It was a masterpiece of gaslighting. "Ethan struggled to find his way in the world," it read. "We tried so hard to help him, to guide him, but he was always lost. He rejected our love, but we never stopped giving it. It painted them as saints and me as a burden. It framed my independence as rebellion, and my success as luck. Even in death, he couldn't let me have a win. He had to make sure everyone knew that he was the benevolent patriarch dealing with a difficult son." "He's going to read this?" I asked Miller. "He's going to try," Miller said grimly. The funeral was at the Holy Trinity Chapel, the most expensive venue in town. The parking lot was full of luxury cars. My parents had invited everyone, not to honor me, but to show off that they were still part of the elite. The FBI convoy pulled up around the back. It was a silent operation. Agents dressed as private security and church staff had already infiltrated the building. I waited in a tinted SUV near the rear entrance. The rain hammered on the roof. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was adrenaline. "The service is starting," the driver said, listening to the tactical channel. "The family is seated." We tapped into the church's audio system. I could hear everything through the speakers in the SUV. The organ music faded. I heard sobbing. Loud, theatrical wailing. "That's Mom," I said. "She's crying louder than she did when her poodle died." "It's a performance," Miller said. "She knows the insurance adjusters might be in the audience." The pastor began the service. He read the lies my parents had fed him. He talked about my troubled spirit and my wanderlust. I could hear people sniffing. My friends, my cousins, people who actually cared. They were all crying, totally manipulated by the sociopaths in the front row. Just before the main eulogy, there was a shuffling sound near the microphone. "I just want to say a few words," a voice said. It was Julian. He was going off script. Ethan was. You know, he was my big brother, Julian said, his voice sounding bored but trying to fake emotion. And I know he would have wanted me to have his Porsche. He always said, Jules, if anything happens to me, you take the 911. So, I'm going to drive it for him. A few people chuckled nervously. My jaw tightened. I had never said that. I explicitly told him he was never allowed to touch my car after he crashed his own. He was claiming my property before my body was even cold. He was dividing the spoils in front of the congregation. Thank you, Julian, my father's voice boomed, taking over the podium. The room went quiet. Robert cleared his throat. My son was a ghost long before he died, he began, his voice dripping with fake solemnity. He was lost to us years ago. We tried to save him. We paid his debts. We covered his mistakes. Liar, I whispered. But now, Robert continued, he is at peace. And we must move forward. Agent Miller spoke into his radio. Target is lying. Asset is green. Go. The back doors of the church didn't just open. They were thrown wide by two agents. The heavy wood slammed against the walls with a crack like thunder. The sound echoed through the high ceilings of the chapel. The organist stopped playing. I stepped into the aisle. The bright sunlight from outside framed me in a silhouette before the doors swung shut, trapping the room in silence. I walked slowly down the center aisle. The sound of my dress shoes on the hardwood floor was the only noise in the building. Click, click, click. One head turned in the back row. Then another. A gasp started at the rear and rippled forward like a wave. People stood up. Someone screamed. I kept my eyes locked on the front of the church. Locked on the three people standing by the altar. Robert froze mid-sentence. His mouth stayed open, but no sound came out. His face went from flushed red to a pale, sickly white in the span of a second. Linda turned around to see what everyone was looking at. When she saw me, she screamed, a real, blood-curdling scream this time, not the fake wail she had practiced. She clutched her chest and fainted, collapsing into the pew. Julian dropped his phone. He looked like he was going to vomit. I stopped 10 feet from the podium. I'm not lost, Dad, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room without a microphone. And I'm definitely not dead. Julian panicked. He tried to bolt for the side exit, scrambling over the communion rail. Federal agents. Nobody move, Miller shouted, stepping out from the choir loft where he had been hiding in a robe. FBI. Down. Get down. The side doors burst open. 12 agents in tactical gear swarmed the room. Julian was tackled by an agent disguised as a choir member before he could reach the emergency exit. He was slammed face first into the carpet, his hands wrenched behind his back. The two, lone sharks, in the back row stood up to run, but agents were already on them, zip-tying their wrists. Pandemonium broke out. The attendees were screaming, ducking under pews. But I stood still. I walked up to the podium, standing next to my terrified father. He was shaking violently, clutching the lectern like a life raft. He looked at me with eyes full of horror, not because I was alive, but because he knew his life was over. I picked up the urn that was sitting on a pedestal next to his sermon notes. It felt light, wood, ash and sand, I announced to the horrified crowd, holding the urn high. That's what my life was worth to you, Dad. $4 million in a bucket of dirty sand. Ethan, please, he whispered, tears streaming down his face. We needed the money. We did it for the family. I am the family, I said. I dropped the urn. It hit the stone floor and shattered. Gray dust and sand exploded across the altar, coating my father's expensive Italian shoes. Robert Vance, you are under arrest for insurance fraud, wire fraud, and desecration of human remains, Miller said, snapping handcuffs onto my father's wrists. They dragged Linda up from the pew. She was awake now, sobbing hysterically, begging me to tell them it was a mistake. Ethan, tell them, we're your parents, she shrieked as they marched her down the aisle. I didn't say a word. I watched them do the perp walk, in front of their entire social circle. The videographer, who had been hired to record the memorial, was zoomed in on their faces. I turned to the crowd. I saw Sarah in the third row, looking at me like I was a resurrection. I walked over to her. I'm sorry, I said softly. I had to. You're alive, she whispered, touching my arm to make sure I was real. I am, I said. For the first time in years. I turned my back on the altar, on the shattered urn, and on the screaming family being shoved into police cruisers. I walked out of the church doors and into the rain. I was an orphan now, but as the cool air hit my face, I realized I had never been freer.